Welcome to Lexington Public Library's Tales from the Kentucky Room podcast, where we explore Lexington's history and people. I'm your host, David Bryant, and in each episode, we will feature a guest who will share a piece of local history. Thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoy. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Tales from the Kentucky Room podcast. I'm your host, David Bryant, and I'm speaking today with Wayne Johnson. Wayne is a librarian in the Kentucky Room. In a former episode, we did the 250 notable events from Lexington history. A little background, the city of Lexington is celebrating 250 years in 2025, and there are all kinds of events planned for the whole year. The whole city is participating, and the library is also planning lots of festivities. And one of the things we did was we worked with the city and we prepared a list of 250 notable events and also 250 notable Lexingtonians. And Wayne is going to share some of his list with us, and we're going to talk a little bit about it today. So welcome to the podcast, Wayne.
Thanks, David. Yeah, our first podcast was kind of a subjective list of the top 10 notable events in Lexington's history. I rated them, 10 down to 1. This one here will be talking about some notable people in Lexington's history. And like I mentioned in our first podcast, the Lexington History Roundtable group got this idea started maybe 6 or 7 years ago in preparation for the 250th anniversary. So we brainstormed a couple sessions on notable people in Lexington's history. And I compiled a list, and I came up with some criteria because you can't put everybody on there. And the criteria I came up with is they had to be, either living here in Lexington for 7 or 8 years doing the things they were doing, or they had to be born in Lexington. And the final part of it, no pun intended, is they had to be deceased.
Okay.
We were looking through people who are still alive, and it's just kind of hard to separate that list. So I came up with that criteria, came up with a list of 250 notable people in Lexington's history.
Yeah, I think it'd still be, even with those limits, I think it's probably still pretty challenging to narrow that down to 250. Was that a challenging thing to do?
Yes, for sure. And of course, you have your no-brainers like Henry Clay and John Bradford and some of those, John Maxwell, some of those old folks. Today, we'll mention some of the ones who may not be as well known to have Lexington connections and talk about those folks.
Okay. I was thinking you could first kind of go through your top list, for lack of a better way to phrase it. And then after that, we could maybe do a little speed round where I throw out some names at you and you tell us about them. So, okay.
I'll start off with this person who had a big impact on when I came up with the criteria of 7 or 8 years of being in Lexington. I said, I cannot leave this guy off the list.
Okay.
And that's Bear Bryant, former football coach at UK from 1946 through 1953. And he led UK to its greatest heights in football in our history. He went on to win numerous national championships at Alabama. He wasn't just a football coach. He was the football coach. I use this comparison for those people who are familiar with City Slickers, the movie City Slickers, and the Jack Palance character, Curly, who Billy Crystal says is the toughest guy he's ever met. Well, Bear Bryant was tougher than Curly. That's how tough this guy was. Anyway, any list of notable Lexingtonians, in my view, has to have Bear Bryant on the list. Even though he reached his greatest accomplishments at Alabama, he had some notable success here at UK from the late 40s and early 50s.
And he went from UK directly to Alabama?
No, he went to Texas A&M for a couple years and then went to Alabama. He was born in Arkansas, and in fact, he got his nickname Bear because as a teenager, he went to a movie with a couple friends, and they had a exhibition before the movie was to be shown with some guy wrestling a bear. And the guy didn't show up, so the person running the show asked for volunteers to wrestle the bear, and Bear Bryant volunteered and pinned the bear down.
Yeah, you're right. He sounds pretty tough.
Yeah, Bear Bryant is on my notable list.
All right.
Another name that people may not be familiar with is Mona Travis Strader. She was born in the late 1800s, and she was raised in Lexington at her father's farm on Forkland Farm, which, by the way, I grew up behind Forkland Farm. So, of course, I grew up a little bit later than she did, but I'm quite familiar with the farm, and the house was called Forkland, very historical house. But her grandmother basically raised Mona on a home on South Mill Street. She went to Sayre School and Hamilton College here in town. She went on to become a very notable person in the society world. She ended up being married 5 different times to 5 very rich men. She was very wealthy, and at one time she was listed as one of America's 10 most beautiful women, and she was also numerously named on best dressed women of the world.
Mm-hmm.
She grew up here in Lexington. When she died in 1983, and she had apparently in the 60s, at one time, she had $3 billion worth of jewelry, according to the story. And we actually have a book here in the Kentucky room about Mona Strader.
Was she someone who was, well known in the community? Like, was she like a person everyone kind of knew about? Or?
I never had heard of her until a few years ago when somebody called the Kentucky room and said, "Hey, do you have this book?" And I'm like, "Who's this person?" And then I started researching her, and I'd never heard of her before that. But she was known for her society maneuvers, I guess you could say.
All right. Yeah.
Very well known.
Okay.
But of course, I don't run in those societies, so I have a reason not to really.
Neither do I.
Okay. Another name that you might find interesting, and another movie reference, the old Forrest Gump movie, and the scene where Governor George Wallace is blocking the schoolhouse for the African-American students to be not allowed in schools. Forrest Gump picks up the student's book that she dropped. Well, anyway, the president of Alabama at that time was a fellow by the name of Frank Rose.
Okay.
And he actually was the former president before he went to the University of Alabama. He was the former president of Trancey from, I think, 1951 through 1957. And anyway, he was a behind-the-scenes person who helped integrate the University of Alabama. I use that scene from the Forrest Gump movie as an example of his influence.
Was he born in Lexington?
I do not think he was.
Okay.
Some of these folks weren't born in Lexington.
Right.
But I have my handy cheat sheet here, and I'm going to look it up real quick and tell you where he was born. Frank Rose was not born in Lexington.
Okay.
He was born in Meridian, Mississippi.
Ah.
I remember the name Frank Rose growing up because when he went to Alabama, he's actually the one who hired Bear Bryant from Texas A&M, and he actually also hired C.M. Newton, who eventually became our athletic director at UK. He hired both of those coaches at Alabama. So you see a lot of, in the 50s and 60s and 70s, you see a lot of connection between the University of Alabama and Lexington.
Yeah, definitely. All right.
Another one that's on our list is a woman by the name of Florence Cantrell. She was actually the first woman to be elected a city commissioner here in Lexington. I think it was in 1936. And she was also the second woman elected to the Kentucky legislature. And she was born in the area. Her great-great-grandfathers were Isaac Shelby and Ephraim McDowell, 2 notable Kentuckians. And I think at some point, if I remember my LPL history correctly, she was a board member of the Lexington Public Library. But she made the list of 250 notables. We have Harry Sykes. He was a pioneering civil rights and government leader here in Lexington, an educator. And he was born in Biloxi, Mississippi, I think maybe 1927. And in 1963, he was the first African-American voted to the Lexington City Commission. I remember him growing up also. He ran for mayor, I think, in 1971 and was defeated by Foster Pettit.
Okay.
But, if you grew up here in Lexington, you knew who Harry Sykes was.
Yeah, that's one of those names that you see from time to time.
Yeah, and they actually named a street after him off Red Mile Road. So he's very notable. Another notable name is John Gaines, who's a noted horseman, and his family owned the old Gainesway dog food company.
Oh, right.
Yeah, and he came to Lexington and he owned the Gainesway farm. And he's for those folks that love horse racing or horses, he was the inspiration for two major ideas here in the horse world. Closer to home, he was the person that came up with the idea of the Kentucky Horse Park, which I'm sure most of our listeners have been out there.
Mm-hmm.
Just got back a couple weeks ago from Southern Lights. They have Southern Lights out there each Christmas. And he also was the one who came up with the world event Breeders' Cup, the 2-day horse racing event. So John Gaines, who owned Gainesway Farm, is the one who came up with those.
That's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And a lot of this stuff I didn't, I learned as I researched this, and I'm like, gosh, it's interesting. And here's a name that, like I mentioned earlier, our roundtable group put together, had a brainstorming session, and one of the members, his grandfather was William B. Terry,
Mm-hmm.
who was the head of the Bluegrass Coca-Cola Bottling Company, very noted businessman here in Lexington, owned a horse farm, had a major impact in Lexington, and he was described as a quiet leader. One of those guys who but did a lot of stuff behind the scenes, wasn't looking for the publicity. But one gentleman noted in the newspaper article when Mr. Terry died that he had a big heart and gave generously to charities. Also, which I found very interesting and so nice, is he owned some restaurants and he would pay for the school for college for some of the waitresses who had children that couldn't afford college. He would send them through. Very, very generous man. And that was William Terry. He died in 2000.
Oh, wow.
Now, I know you know this name, and anybody that schedules meeting rooms here at the library, Adlin Wickman, who is a local artist, is one of our notable 250s. She designed the National Thoroughbred Racing Association's Eclipse Award. She also did the work on our pendulum artwork.
What Wayne's referring to is that at the Central Library, we have a public room that can be reserved, and it's the Wickman Reading Room.
Yes,
and so
named after her and her husband.
Yes, yeah.
I met her a couple times before she passed on at the reference desk. Very pleasant lady. You remember the customers who are very pleasant with you because, sometimes they're not so pleasant. Most of them are, but she was really pleasant, and I liked working with her. And, when we had the Horse Mania art exhibit throughout town back in the early 2000s, she had a horse. She designed a horse with her artistic abilities, and it was stolen. And and she was quoted in the newspaper. She had a sense of humor. She commented, well, she considered it an honor that her horse was the first one stolen.
Right.
But she was a very noted.
It was in high demand.
Yes, very noted artist and very nice lady.
And do you know, why did she have some sort of special connection with the library, or she was just a library supporter?
I think probably just a library supporter.
Mm-hmm.
I think she worked with Miss Little, Lucille Little, who's also, by the way, on our list. And we did a podcast on her several years ago about her kidnapping. I think they worked as a tandem. Nice. She did the artwork. Lucille Little did the financial work, created a great project there. Another person who made our list is a person by the name of Judge Richard Stahl, born in Lexington in 1876. He played football at UK. He was a noted judge here in town, and the old Stahl Field football field, which has since been torn down, it's where the Singletary Arts Center is now. That used to be the old Stahl Field, and it was named in his honor. And a little piece of trivia about Judge Stahl is, Kentucky's colors are blue and white. Well, he was in a committee meeting when they decided what color blue were we going to use. This was like in the early 1900s, I guess, late 1800s. And he had on a particular blue tie. and he just took his tie off and said, "This will be our colors." And that's how Kentucky's got the blue color.
Well, I think we'd have to say that's got to be one of the most notable Lexingtonians if this person chose the blue.
Yeah.
And all blue.
And all these notables I failed to mention at the start of the podcast, we're going to have biographies for each one.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to have binders. And if people want to come down to the Kentucky Room and do research on them, we'll have binder full of information.
Yeah, for the people listening who can't see, Wayne is here and he has large amounts of documentation with him that...
Well, I knew you would ask some tough questions, so I tried to come prepared. Another person who I consider a notable person in Lexington's history is Lou Johnson, who's a famous baseball player for the Los Angeles Dodgers in the 1960s. He grew up here in Lexington and Proudtown, went to Dunbar High School, and he was a noted athlete in high school, football and basketball, but he didn't play baseball. And he turned out to be a very good baseball player, helped the Dodgers win the 1965 World Series, hit a game-winning home run in Game 7 of the World Series against the Minnesota Twins. And I always like to say when I talk about Lou Johnson that he was a hero of the 65 World Series Game 7, but he had a little help from Sandy Koufax. And anybody that knows their baseball from the 1960s knows exactly what I'm talking about. I won't elaborate any further.
Okay.
We have parks named here in Lexington after some notable people that you may not know about. My wife takes me out to these concerts out at Ecton Park. She takes me out there because I don't necessarily want to go to them, but I go. Well, Ecton Park is out there off Turkey Foot Road, and it's named after a civic leader here in Lexington in the 1950s, 60s, Penrose Ecton. That's who Ecton Park was named after. And he was voted named the most outstanding citizen in 1972. And he did a lot of work on the merger work from 72, 73 to 74. So he was very prominent in the merger. And another park that we're all familiar with, Jacobson Park, was named after Ernest Jacobson, who was a Lexington Water Works general manager back in the 50s and 60s.
These are all really interesting names, places that you may go by all the time, Ecton Park, and not realize, who that is really named after. And I think you already mentioned this earlier, but it's something you've said before. You really wanted to stress you're not saying these are the most important people in Lexington, but you're giving a representation of...
Yeah, I make it a point to call this list a notable list because it's not necessarily the most notable. That would be bringing in my own personal opinion, I guess. I mean, there's certain people that, for an example, Henry Clay. Anybody makes a list of 250 notables. If they don't have Henry Clay on there, just throw the list away, in my view. But there's lots of people that have done notable things in Lexington, but that may not be remembered in the history books. And that's what we're trying to do with this list of 250 notables. Another person who I had the pleasure to meet a few times here because she really always had a hard time when she came here to work the copiers. So I would help her with her copying, was Betty Lee Maston, a noted Lexington Herald reporter on architecture and old houses for, like 60 years. She had a weekly column where she would write about a particular site or a particular house. She was another person that was a joy to work with, always pleasant and always polite. She always called me, I always got a kick out of it because she had those old manners that some of the folks would have, and she'd always call me Mr. Johnson. And I mean, I've been called a lot of things here at the library, and some of them not so great. And she would always say, "Thank you, Mr. Johnson." So I always enjoyed working with her. But she served on the Bluegrass Trust. She was a noted authority on architecture in Lexington and surrounding areas. She made the Kentucky Journalism Hall of Fame in 2017, and her papers are held at the UK Special Collections Department. And any architecture student or researcher would have their time well spent if they look at some of her stories that she head in the newspaper. And another person who made our list was Fred Fugazi. I think we mentioned him when we did our railroad podcast here a few years ago. He was very instrumental in leading the project to get the downtown railroad tracks removed from Lexington in 1968. And this led to Lexington's downtown being able to be developed. They called it urban renewal. And as Lexington's mayor and also city commissioner, he led the effort to get these downtown tracks removed and worked with, I think, the C&O Railroad. And he got it done and very notable in our history. Just a couple quick other ones, and we can do a you call it speed round, we could do that. Tommy Bell is one that always, Tommy Bell was a Lexington lawyer, a civic leader, and I've always thought of him as being, I remember him growing up. He was also a noted NFL football referee. So you got to see him on national TV, and it's like, hey, this Tommy Bell's from Lexington. So that was always a matter of pride for us football fans watching those games. But he was a very enthusiastic civic leader of Lexington, kind of a cheerleader for the city.
Like a promoter for the city.
Yes.
Yeah.
And he was so respected. When he passed away in, I believe it was 1986, they named a award after him that's called the Tommy Bell Academic Athletic Award. It goes to one person each year from a Lexington Fayette County high school who combines both academics and athletic achievements. And it's a very honored award. So that's Tommy Bell. Another person I can't fail to mention, because this is another name. I'd never heard of this person before until somebody in our Lexington Roundtable group, when we were brainstorming, mentioned this person's name, Amory Vanden Bosch. He was the first head of UK's Patterson School of Diplomacy, and he spent most of his career at UK, and he actually served as a member that helped draft the UN Charter, United Nations Charter. And I'd never heard of him.
Wow.
And when this gentleman mentioned him, I said to myself, I got to research this guy. And so he made the list.
Yeah, definitely. This is fascinating, hearing these names, and it's just kind of really jogs your memory and like thinking about these names you've seen before.
And this is just a few. If people want to learn more about it, the list will probably be available sometime in early February in at the Kentucky Room.
Mm-hmm.
And I do want to mention one more before you get to our speed round.
Sure.
Because she had some connections with the Lexington Public Library. And in fact, I think she was one of the workers on our early bookmobiles. Harriet Van Meter founded the International Book Project in 1966.
Mm-hmm.
And her project helped people in countries who did not have a lot of reading material. Her project got books and magazines to these countries. And her project earned her a Nobel Peace Prize nomination in 1986. And she was known as the Book Lady because she started the International Book Project. So it's names like this, and we got plenty more. We can't fit them all on one podcast. It's just amazing the type of talent we have in Lexington.
I feel like I could talk about these for hours with you.
Yeah, we could.
And so, like you said, one thing that I thought would be kind of fun, I've worked in the Kentucky Room almost 10 years now, and certain names start popping up. You see them a lot with people coming in doing research. And I just thought I'd throw a few out, and you can kind of let us know, tell us about everyone. The first one on my list is Thomas Clark.
Thomas Clark. From Mississippi, if I remember correctly, noted author of Kentucky history, worked as a professor at UK for several decades. And then when I think he was forced to retire or something, and then went to Indiana for a few years and then came back. And I had the pleasure of meeting him a couple of times here in the Kentucky Room. And he and Bill Marshall were actually the two people that were allowed to come in and say, I want to see this bound volume instead of our microfilm copy. So whenever Dr. Clark would come in and wanted a bound newspaper in our closed stacks, we knew to get that.
That was a big deal.
Yeah. And he lived to, I think, 101 years old.
Wow. Okay.
And I always find it interesting as somebody who enjoys history. I enjoy history, but it's mostly local Kentucky history that I find it amazing that somebody who's born in Mississippi can can just be such a prolific author on Kentucky history, so
Yeah.
much knowledge.
I agree. It's like if you're from the location,
Yeah.
you're so much farther ahead
Yeah.
than other people learning it.
Yeah.
J. Winston Coleman.
J. Winston Coleman.
A
Now
personal favorite. I love those little pamphlets.
He's answered many a question here in the Kentucky Room with his books. I forget what his occupation was, but he was a farmer in addition. In fact, the Windburn area is named for him and his wife. They named their farm Windburn, his first three initials Win, and then her name was Burnetta, so you get Windburn. He wrote many books on local history. He's another one who had a weekly column in the Herald Leader on Sundays, I believe, for about 4 or 5 years. And it was called Historic Kentucky. And he would have pictures and write a little story about famous place in Kentucky.
Yeah, and they're kind of like pamphlets, like short, different locations around central Kentucky and stuff. People collect those, and they will come in from time to time telling us that they have all of them, but they're looking for one. Yeah, I've had say that before.
They published it, I think, in the late 40s, early 50s, I think, and then they ceased it. But they were so popular with people, even after he retired from doing it, they would still put them in the newspaper years after he published them.
Henry Faulkner
is an interesting person. He's a noted character here in Lexington. Great artist. Lived off of, I think, North Broadway somewhere. He was known for his love of animals. I had a lot of cats. Had a goat. Yeah, I read something where he had goats in plurals. I don't know. He was a very popular figure here in Lexington in the art world. And unfortunately, he died in a car wreck, December 1981, somewhere around there. Terrible accident.
This next name was one that you had to fill me in on, John Y. Brown.
John Y. Brown. Okay, well, John Y. Brown Jr.,
okay.
Because his father was a noted politician
okay.
here in town. But John Y., those of us who grew up here in Lexington refer to him as John Y. If you mention John Y., you know who you're talking about. He got Colonel Sanders, who invented the Kentucky Fried Chicken recipe. He turned that into a franchise. So John Y. Brown was basically the founder of the Kentucky Fried Chicken franchise, which if you grew up, well, even now it's a very popular fried chicken place, but growing up in the 60s is like the go-to if you wanted fried chicken, Kentucky Fried Chicken. And so he also owned the Boston Celtics for a while, and he didn't really dabble in politics until he married Phyllis George Brown, who was Miss America back in 1970, I believe, 71. And he married her in 1979, and like in the springtime of that year decided, hey, I'm going to run for governor. And, of course, if you're married to Phyllis George Brown and you have his money, he was going to be hard to beat. So he became governor of the state. A very, very prominent businessman, very successful businessman. Probably, in my mind, he had some health issues in his administration when he was governor, heart surgery, I believe. And I think that kind of maybe held him back because he had all the potential to he was mentioned at one time as possibly a vice presidential nominee for one of the candidates. He was pretty prominent on the national scene of the Democratic Party.
Okay, this next name is probably one not everyone will recognize, but he was pretty significant. Garvis Kincaid.
Garvis Kincaid. What can I say about Garvis Kincaid? When I was growing up, he was a local businessman, richest man in town, okay? I don't care what anybody says. He was the richest man in town. Had a house over there off Shenaway Road, and we always got a big kick because my school bus would drive by there every day, and you always knew it was Christmas season because back in those days, people didn't decorate for Christmas like they do now, but he would. He had a life-size sleigh, life-size Santa Claus, and reindeer with Rudolph with the red nose in his front yard. And we, as kids, we would always look for that decoration. And when we saw it, we said, oh, Christmas season's here. Yeah, he was a very rich man, very successful businessman.
Do you know what his business was?
The Kentucky Central Life Insurance Company, among many. He had many business ventures. He owned some radio stations. He was born in Lee County, but he came to Lexington. I think he was a graduate of law school and maybe had plans to become a lawyer, but dabbled in real estate and all that. And then when he found out how successful, or maybe for him, how easy it was to make money, decided to forego that legal career and became I would say in business terms, he's the most notable person in Lexington's history, at least for my generation. We were mentioning parks, and we had, was it Benjamin Gratz that was on your list?
Uh-huh.
Well, he was a local businessman, very successful in the 1800s, and that's who Gratz Park is named after.
And I think that there's a reference to when, correct me if I'm wrong, when Lafayette visited, I think they went to Benjamin Gratz's house.
Actually, the story is that Henry Gratz, his son, I think it's, Henry Gratz, who later became a noted Kentucky Gazette editor, Lafayette would bounce kids off his knees.
Okay.
And Benjamin Gratz's son was one of them.
Ah, okay. Wayne, you're truly amazing.
The people
knowledge.
The people that write this stuff are the amazing, and research it are amazing. I just read it and repeat it. So
you had one final story you wanted to share. It's really kind of a great story too.
Yeah. When I was putting the criteria together, I'm like, there's so many people that are notable, but they, were here for a year or two, 3, and it's like, well, we got to cut it off at some point. Well, there was a man by the name of Clarky Mayfield who came to the University of Kentucky, I believe in 1959, as a football player, kicker. He was from Harlan County, I believe. And he had some success as a UK football player. And in his last game at UK in 1962, he made the game-winning kick against Tennessee with about 15 seconds left that enabled us to beat Tennessee 12-10. Now, right there, that's notable. Anytime you can beat Tennessee, which is very rarely, all of us football fans know, very rarely is done. And he hit the game-winning kick, and he was a hero. Well, that's not the end of the story. That's not what makes him notable in my mind. He's what I consider a captain's pick. The Ryder Cup golfing event has what they call captain's picks. Each captain is allowed to pick 2 people. Well, Clarky Mayfield is my captain's pick for the Lexington 250 notable. After he finished his football career here at UK, he went on to coach high school football and then went on to coach college football. And in 1977, he was the head coach of the Jacksonville State College in Alabama. And stories have it that he was bound in a tournament at some point to come back to UK and be the football coach. And I have no doubt he probably would have made it. But in the spring of 1977, he got a phone call from somebody up in Ohio that was planning a retirement party for his mother after 40 years of teaching in schools. He said, I'll be there. They had a big party in May of 1977 at the Beverly Hills Supper Club. And those of us who know that name and knows what happened there can kind of figure out where I'm going with this. But anyway, the fire broke out, and there was about 40 people in his party, and he was able to get his mother and son and maybe some other family members out of the fire and got them outside. He was out there with them, escaped the fire. He went back in to try to save others.
Wow.
And became disoriented, I guess probably because of the smoke, and they found his body later. But instead of staying outside, he went back in and tried to do something. And anyway, that's why he's my captain's pick.
Oh, I can totally see why. People are notable for many reasons, and that was a very special reason.
Yes, and his football team dedicated the 1977 football season to him, and they made it all the way to the national, I think Division II national championship game, and they were defeated, but they thought very highly of Mayfield.
All right. Well, it'd be kind of hard to top that story, because I think that might be a good place to end it. But Wayne, thank you so much for sharing your research and your knowledge. This is, as always, it's been really fascinating. It's been a pleasure to talk to you.
And like I said, for folks who listen to this podcast and for the upcoming 250 celebration, hopefully they'll have more of an interest in local history. And the Kentucky Room is a place to come to do your research. And we're going to have binders filled with these people and these events. And if you decide that you want to research or do a paper, college paper, high school paper, on any of these topics, we'll have the material for you now.
Yeah, absolutely. Feel free. It's a fun afternoon. Come down to the Kentucky Room and you can spend hours just looking at amazing things.
2 hours worth of free parking, too.
Yes.
I should have gone into marketing.
Exactly, yeah. All right. Well, thank you, Wayne.
Okay, thank you, David.
Thanks for listening to Tales from the Kentucky Room, a podcast brought to you by the Central Library's Kentucky Room staff at the Lexington Public Library. If you enjoyed listening, please take a minute to subscribe, rate, and review the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever else you get your podcast. And please remember to recommend the podcast to friends. If you have any questions about local history or genealogy research, you can visit us in the Kentucky Room to use our collection and newspaper microfilm. Or you can email us at elibrarian@lexpublib.org. That's elibrarian@lexpublib.org. I'm David Bryant, and we'll be back with another episode next month.